ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
This conversation includes content that may be sensitive for some listeners.
So there's this internet that all of us use on a daily basis. It's got bazillions of websites that you can find with a search engine and look at through a typical web browser. This is what's known as the surface internet. But there is another internet that sits below the everyday web, an invisible network that's known as the deep web. And this is where things are kept that you want to keep private, things like online banking, webmail, Facebook, Instagram pages, cloud storage, and there's nothing necessarily sinister about that. But there is another layer to this deep web, and this is known as the dark web, where all kinds of other things happen. The dark web is a marketplace where, under the cloak of anonymity, people sell, buy and share anything that a person is willing to pay for. Eileen Ormsby is a lawyer turned investigative journalist who spent more than a decade delving into the internet's underbelly, from dark to very dark. And just a heads up, if you've got children in the car or listening in, this might not be a conversation for them. Eileen Ormsby has written several books about the dark web and the parts of it that have spilled out into her real life. Hello, Eileen.
Hi, Richard.
You were, for some time, a successful corporate lawyer in London, making probably, I imagine, pretty decent living. What on earth made you want to give that up and become a journalist, Eileen?
I was in London. I was in London in 2008 when the global financial crisis hit. And that gave me an existential crisis because I felt like I was working for the bad guys at the time, people losing their houses, and here I was telling funds managers and businesses how to protect their money. I came back to Australia. I kept working as a lawyer for a little while longer, but then I decided to quit altogether and go and do a writing course at RMIT. And from there, I became a journalist.
How were you introduced to what was the main marketplace on the dark web, the entity that was known as the Silk Road? Who introduced it to you?
It was in 2011, and I had a friend who actually was ordering acid through the Silk Road, and they told me about it. I couldn't believe it. That sounded crazy, that they were just going on this website they could browse through and buy things and then have it sent directly to them in the mail. So I, of course, had to jump on and have a look myself. So they sort of walked me through the technical aspects of it, because you couldn't just go and Google Silk Road and find it. You needed to download special software to get there. And once I got in there and I saw this website that looked just like any other e-commerce site, except what you're browsing and popping into your basket is marijuana, ecstasy, even heroin. Any drug imaginable.
In my mind, I think I imagined it looked like some ratty website from the 90s or something, from the dial-up days, with bad graphics and what have you. But what you're saying sounds like it wasn't like that at all.
It did at the very beginning, in the very early days, when there weren't a lot of sellers on there, but it became this incredibly slick website that looked as good as any other e-commerce site that you'll come across.
What, like eBay?
Yeah, and it worked very much like eBay in that it brought together buyers and sellers. The buyer would browse through the listings, they'd pop something into their basket, they'd pay with Bitcoin, and then that Bitcoin actually went to the site where it was held in escrow until they received the drugs. Once they received the drugs, they'd go and leave a review for the dealer, and then the money would be released from escrow to the dealer.
So the drugs would be bought with Bitcoin, and if you liked the service you got and the quality of the drugs, and this you're talking about anything from like weed to heroin here, you could leave a review underneath the vendor's page on this Silk Road website?
That's absolutely correct. That's exactly how it worked. And because the vendors were working on repeat custom, they put a lot into customer service to make sure people were happy.
Did it feel like a wonderland or something, or was it more banal than that? It sounds like both to me.
It was a bit of both. At first, it was mind-blowing. I just could not believe that it was operating very openly. I could get there, anyone could get there, including law enforcement. You know, a lot was made of, your teenagers are hopping on the dark web and downloading heroin directly to their veins or something like that in the tabloids at the time, which is not exactly true. it does take quite a bit of effort and technical know-how to get there, and then also to arrange Bitcoin and that sort of thing as well. So it wasn't as simple as clicking a couple of buttons, but it was certainly operating out in the open.
When my producer and I were talking about this, we started Googling things, dark web and Silk Road, and there was this vague sense of sinfulness that came over us, and we worried, I don't know, it just felt odd. It felt strange. Did you feel like that coming into that world?
Oh, absolutely. The first few times I double-clicked that little onion that appeared on my desktop that was the entree into the dark web, I always felt like I was doing something a bit nefarious, a bit illegal, but just going on the dark web and browsing around is not illegal at all. It depends on what you're browsing, but certainly browsing things like Silk Road was not illegal at all.
So the Silk Road was this great big marketplace that was living on the dark web. What would happen if you tried to go to the Silk Road or any other dark website on a normal browser, like the standard browsers you use for going into the normal internet?
Even if you knew the exact URL that you needed to put in, and the URL was big, long gobbledygook letters and symbols and then ending in .onion, even if you knew the exact URL and put that into your browser, it would just come up as page not found, this site does not exist.
Is there any secret to the .onion suffix there? Has that got anything to do with some kind of coder's inside joke, or has it got something to do with the layers of the internet?
The onion sort of represented the layers of encryption, and each layer has to be peeled back to get to the next level, to get to the next level. It's colloquially talking about how your signal is bounced around to get to the endpoint.
So you access the dark web through this specific web browser. Does it have its own search engine within the dark web?
It does now. It didn't back then. But nowadays you can search. The thing is with those search engines is pretty much everything that is put into them are scams. So people will mirror any successful website in order to try to steal people's Bitcoin. So it's generally not safe to go in there and just start doing searches, especially if you want to actually use it. But mostly back then you had to know the exact URL of the site that you wanted to go to.
Who actually built the dark web? Where does it come from?
The dark web itself, which is just the colloquial name we give to what are really known as hidden services, or these websites that you can only access via a darknet. This particular darknet called Tor was developed partially by the US Navy to protect military secrets. That's what it was originally developed for. But they sort of knew that if anyone was sniffing around their traffic, and if only the military had access to it, they'd know that any of that traffic was military traffic. So they opened it up to the world, made it open source, made it available to anybody that wanted to use it.
Are you telling me that the military, US Navy built it, and then they wanted to hide in the forest, really, once they'd built it, with all this other traffic that was going around it?
Yeah, more or less. That's how it happened at the time.
What level of anonymity does the dark web offer its users?
A lot more than your average VPN. I really don't know the deep technical side of it, but it hides both the website, the operators of the website from any prying eyes, and it also hides the people that are using it from the operators of the website. The website will know that it's had a visitor, but not where that visitor is or where they came from, and there's no way of them to actually find out just using cyber tools.
So once people were able to find a reputable drug dealer on the Silk Road within the dark web, how did they actually get hold of the drugs? How were they delivered to the purchaser?
It came through the mail, and the main reason for that is because most of these were personal use sizes of drugs, so they were easily able to be hidden in small envelopes and packages that were indistinguishable from a billion other envelopes or packages that were going through the mail at the time, so very low chance of getting caught.
The Silk Road, this big bazaar that used to exist and has since been replaced, was it just about drugs, or was it offering other goods and services like guns or pornography or other criminal services? Were they sold on Silk Road as well? So
the first rule in the seller's manual was you can sell anything here, the purpose of which is not to harm or defraud another person. So things like stolen credit cards and fraud materials, those sorts of things were not allowed to be sold. Certainly no child sexual abuse material was allowed to be sold. There was a time where weapons were sold on the Silk Road. That was very short-lived because there was soon this really huge debate amongst the Silk Road community, which is the community of buyers and sellers, about A, whether weapons were something the purpose of which was to harm another person. And there was a big split between USA and rest of the world on that one. But B, how much further heat. A lot of people said drugs are one thing, weapons are another thing altogether. It's going to bring heat onto the site. And so very shortly after they were introduced, they were banned on Silk Road.
You make it sound like there's this kind of idealism around it within a certain kind of philosophy. Is that right?
There's a huge idealism about the whole place. It really felt like a revolution. For people that are against the war on drugs, and I'm very much drug law reform advocate, I am against the war on drugs. For people like that, it was a revelation. It was a place where people could come peacefully and buy things. There were reviews and that they could make sure that they're getting what they were thinking they were getting. There was independent testers on there. Silk Road even hired a physician that gave free bespoke advice to all of Silk Road's customers. He went by his real name, Dr. Fernando Cordovilla, and he was a drug specialist and he gave free advice.
If I want to take methamphetamines and I've got a heart condition, should I do it? That kind of thing?
Exactly that kind of thing.
Oh, my God.
And if I'm taking this drug, what should I be thinking about? All those sorts of things. It was a huge ongoing thread on one of the forums where people could just ask anything.
It sounds like they have the same kind of community groups that we might find on the regular internet. Is that right?
Certainly did. It was a really robust community, really interesting people. Silk Road had a book club. It had movie nights where everybody would watch the same movie at the same time and then discuss it.
A book club?
A book club.
On a drug trading site?
Yes,
wow.
Absolutely.
And what was the prescribed reading on these book club sites on the Silk Road?
It was mostly libertarian, agorism, philosophy type books, fairly heavy sort of stuff. The movie night, I remember, was V for Vendetta was the big one, but definitely things that sort of aligned with those libertarian ideals.
And were you lurking on these sites or were you participating in these conversations within these chat rooms?
Oh, I was 100% participating, and I was participating under my real name. I mean, I had a username on there, Oz Freelancer, but I connected that with my real-world identity and told everybody, I am a journalist. I want to give a balanced view of this, a non-tabloid view of this site. If you want to talk to me, come and talk to me. And a lot of people wanted to come and talk to me.
And what did they tell you when they came forward?
Oh, absolutely everything. I had the buyers, I had the sellers, I had some of the staff talking to me, just telling me why they use it. A lot of people just wanted to get that out there, of reasons why they used it. A lot of the sellers, I think, because I had a blog running at the time, which didn't have as many checks and balances as, say, putting something in the Sydney Morning Herald, a lot of them just hoped that I would talk them up and review them online, which I didn't do. So, but there was all sorts of reasons that people spoke to me.
Did you trust what people were telling you?
Most of the time, yes. You can sort of get a sense for it, and you can tell that you're talking to the same person all the time, even though obviously everybody hides behind pseudonyms and doesn't give their real names. The use of what we call PGP encryption, pretty good privacy encryption, meant that you could sign your correspondence and only one person has the key to that signature. Therefore, you knew that you were talking to the same person over and over again and not someone pretending to be that person.
There are more people than many people would realise out there who are functioning heroin addicts, who've got a middle-class job and able to sustain a heroin habit that they've had for years and years. I just wonder if you're meeting those kinds of people on the Silk Road back then and how much their lives had changed by being able to buy drugs on the internet and having it delivered through the mail as opposed to having to go out and find it on the street.
100%. I did actually speak to several heroin addicts that said that just having a regular, clean supply, so it's a supply that they knew exactly the purity every time. They didn't have to go out and find a dealer on a corner who may or may not be there next week. They were able to just get this regular supply, and it actually made them more functioning, more high functioning. And for a couple, it actually made them decide to go and get off heroin, go and get help, because they were able to be clear-headed for a few days because they had their clean supply in them and they were able to make better decisions.
So you're finding out all this extraordinary information What did you do with it all once you'd been able to glean it from these conversations with people who were using the Silk Road?
I used it for my journalism, so I became very much, at least Fairfax, back at the time it was Fairfax, their newspaper's go-to person for stories on the dark web. And then I also started writing a book.
What was the reader response to these stories in the Fairfax papers, as they were back then? General readers, what was their reaction to it?
General readers in those sorts of newspapers were somewhat open to the idea that it wasn't the boogeyman, it wasn't someone coming for your teenagers to get everybody hooked on heroin. There were always a lot of people saying, just say no, and didn't like what I was saying. Most of the Silk Road community were very open to it. There was always some people that were very against any journalist being in their secret society, but most people were pretty open to it.
There are people saying you shouldn't even be talking about it because to talk about it is to draw attention to it and maybe direct potential customers its way.
Oh, look, totally. But that tended to be, people that had just found it themselves, so they wanted to think that they were special and had this great secret.
So there's a clubbiness to the place, was there, like that?
Absolutely. The thing was, it was never meant to be a secret. He didn't build it to be a secret. He built it so they would come, so that everybody would hear about it and log on and try it for themselves.
Okay, so who is this he we're talking about, the man who built the Silk Road, the owner and founder of the Silk Road? Tell me about this man.
So the founder and owner of Silk Road was, at the time, a man in his mid to late 20s called Ross Ulbricht. He was a Texan from a good family, Eagle Scout. Obviously, I did not know that at the time. His name on the website, at first it was just admin, but then in February 2012 it became the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Like from The Princess Bride.
Exactly, from The Princess Bride. And the whole idea was that people would start to wonder whether it was one person or it was a name that was being handed down.
Oh, because the Dread Pirate Roberts was a real historical figure, but kept on passing the title down to his successors as he got older, and there was a new Pirate Roberts that would keep the same name. So that was the thinking, was it?
That was the thinking.
And was he effectively, in his mind anyway, a libertarian idealist then?
Oh, absolutely. 100% he was a libertarian idealist. He used to post all these rousing epistles on there about sticking it to the man and changing the world, the revolution, the whole lot. And he built this real cult-like following. People loved him, which served him very well when a few other people thought, oh, well, Silk Road's doing really well, and tried to start their own version of Silk Road, and no one would go there. Everyone was just like, no, we're loyal to the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Was he happy to talk to you?
Look, he talked to me a couple of times. Early in the piece, I said, I'm writing a book. Would you help? And he said, get back to me when you're finished and I'll read it and I'll decide whether I want to be involved then. He did speak to me for a piece that I did about the scientists and the doctors that were involved in Silk Road. He spoke to me about having them be involved at length, but never anything personal, never anything he wouldn't have said publicly.
How did he start? What story does he have about how he got the idea for the Silk Road on the dark web and how it grew?
The idea came from a 2010 thread on the Bitcoin forum. Back then, Bitcoin was worth less than $1. Back then, it was probably not worth a cent. But there were a whole lot of cypherpunks or whatever they called themselves that got together and used to talk about it. And someone posited the idea, could Bitcoin be used for a heroin store? They called it a heroin store. They said if you use Tor and you use Bitcoin, could such a thing exist? And this debate about the whole thing and how it would work went for hundreds and hundreds of messages. And then one day, I think it was January 2011, someone popped their head in, called Altoid, and said, oh, hey guys, have you heard of something called the Silk Road? I just stumbled across it. It's on Tor and it's exactly what you're talking about. And Altoid, of course, turned out to be Ross Ulbricht. And that's how he started. And he literally grew mushrooms and sold them on this little site that he'd called the Silk Road.
Psilocybin magic mushrooms.
That's correct, yeah.
And it must have grown pretty quickly there. How many people were using Silk Road? Do we have any idea at the height of its popularity?
The height of its popularity, there were tens of thousands of active users, at least. I think there was over 1 million people that had signed up, but an awful lot of people sign up just to have a little look around and never actually order anything. Or people sign up under 20 different names. So it's a bit hard to tell, but I think The amount of money that went through was originally reported as being $1.2 billion, but that was way overstated. It was more around $200 million that went through Silk Road.
And he's taking a little piece of every transaction, I'm assuming, as do legitimate sites like eBay or Airbnb and the like. How rich did he get from Silk Road?
It's almost impossible to tell because he didn't spend any of it. He would have taken probably an average of 10% of all the money that went through Silk Road. But then the thing that most of the drug dealers on Silk Road didn't make their fortunes, the ones that got really rich, didn't make their fortunes on the selling of the drugs, but on the increase in the price of Bitcoin. So what would happen, especially with buyers, someone would go and put $200 worth of Bitcoin on their account. They'd buy $100 worth of drugs, go back a couple of weeks later, and they've still got $200 worth because Bitcoin's increased. And they went on and on doing this. So in effect, they were getting all these free drugs because Bitcoin just kept increasing faster than they could buy their drugs. So, yeah, if he had managed to keep all of his Bitcoin until now, he would be one of the world's richest people. He'd certainly be a billionaire.
This kind of activity would have attracted all those alphabet agencies, as they call them in the United States, the IRS, Internal Revenue Service, the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, and the FBI. How did they finally bring about the downfall of the dread Pirate Roberts, a.k.a. Ross Ulbricht?
Every three-letter agency you can imagine, even more than you've said, were working on it. They weren't working together very well. They were very much competing. But in the end, the real smoking gun came down to an IRS agent called Gary Alford, who was poking around to see what the earliest mention of Silk Road was, and he came across this post by Altoid from January 2011 saying, hey, I found this thing called the Silk Road. What do you reckon? And he went through all the rest of Altoid's posts, and they were mostly technical, but one of them was saying, I'm looking for some help on this startup. Please send your resume to rossulbricht@gmail.com.
There it was.
There it
wow.
was. It was always there.
So they found their man. How did they eventually arrest him?
They started putting surveillance on him. Meanwhile, an undercover agent managed to get a job on Silk Road, a job as a moderator. So that was a Homeland Security agent. So he was working in Silk Road at the same time, but he still wasn't able to get any information about the Dread Pirate Roberts. He did not give information to his staff at all. He maintained as much of a distance between himself and them as he did with his customers. So we had this undercover agent in there. We had a name. They started putting him under surveillance. They realised that he mostly worked out of cafes and libraries. So what they were able to do was have this undercover agent message him and say, I need you to log into Silk Road and look at something. So they tracked him to a San Francisco library. They had the undercover agent say, look, I need you to look at something. So they would be sure that he was logged in to the back end of Silk Road. Every person in that library, other than he, was an undercover agent. So they were all pretending to look at the kids' books and all that sort of thing. Two of them started a big fight right behind him, and he turned around to look, and then another agent grabbed his open laptop, and the open laptop was a goldmine. He was logged into every illegal site that he could possibly have been logged into. He had chat logs of all sorts of things. He had a diary that basically said, Dear Diary, today I started the world's most notorious drugs market, and it was all there.
So they had to have the open laptop. What would have happened if he'd closed the laptop?
They would have assumed that he would have had a kill switch, and most likely he would have some sort of switch that he could set off that would just wipe the computer and make it a brick.
What replaced it? What replaced the Silk Road once that was finally taken down after Ross Ulbricht's arrest?
As soon as he got arrested, within a month, Silk Road 2 had popped up. It was run by former staff and vendors of the original Silk Road, unfortunately for them, which also included the undercover Homeland Security agent. So that ran for about a year. It never got to the heights that Silk Road did. But then once that went away, lots and lots of new marketplaces popped up. And some of those dwarfed Silk Road in size. And one of the reasons for that was They did not have an ethos of you can sell anything, the purpose of which is to not to harm or defraud another person. They said you could sell anything, and that anything included stolen credit cards, stolen financial information, personal information, hacking tools, all the things that you hear about that are being sold on the dark web nowadays.
How about global crime syndicates like the Ndrangheta? Are they involved in the dark web? They would have had to have found their way to it, surely.
Look, there were certainly crime syndicates. Organised crime was selling drugs through the dark web, and no doubt there were lots of people using it for secure communications, and that would include all sorts of organised crime syndicates, but I don't know of any specific ones.
Podcast, broadcast. You're listening to Conversations with Richard Feidler. Hear more conversations anytime on the ABC Listen app, or go to abc.net.au/conversations.
So going deeper into the dark web, beyond the Silk Road, the darker web, if you like, it was said that there were hitmen for hire services being offered on the dark web, outside the Silk Road. How true is that?
They were certainly being offered. The hitman sites were all very rudimentary back in the early days. They were WordPress sites set up saying, if you pay me, I'll come anywhere in the world and carry out a hit. You just got to pay first. And they were very obviously designed to part gullible people with their money in the early days. Later on, they became much more sophisticated.
Why were you so sure that they were all fake?
Mostly because they didn't make any sense. Like, as a business model, it didn't make any sense whatsoever. The reason the Silk Road worked as a business model was repeat custom. It was something that was easy to transfer, drugs are easy to send in the mail, and you wanted people to come back as repeat customers. When you've got a hitman for hire, it's not easily transferable. Someone has to literally go and carry out a murder. But also, you're not normally looking at repeat customers. Not many people want to, whack my boss and then whack my ex-wife, and then, once the hitman's got the money out of you, and they'll always want money up front, what possible reason do they have for carrying out the hit? They've got the money. You don't know who they are. So it doesn't make sense as a business model. But I also know, because I had to test this thing myself, so I went and tried to hire a few. I contacted all the ones that I could find and sent them a photograph and asked them to kill my ex-husband.
Why did you ask these places to kill your ex-husband?
Because he was already dead, so I thought he was very safe. But I just wanted to see how it would play out. And really, it played out very much like what do they call 419 scams? What we used to call Nigerian prince scams, where they sort of ask for a little bit up front, and then they'd want more and more and more. And if you didn't say yes to the first amount up front, they'd actually drop it a little bit and say, well, how about this much? They just wanted to get any sort of money out of you whatsoever. But you could tell that they weren't going to carry out any hits.
Oh, so you went to these places to ask them to carry out these what are clearly scam websites, like Nigerian gold websites, to ask them to carry out a hit on your husband who had already died some years ago. As a journalist and a lawyer, were you worried about the ethical implications of doing this? Did you ever stop and say to yourself, what am I doing here?
Well, no, I didn't think that I was doing anything unethical because, there was no chance of any harm coming to anybody. It was more just to be able to say to people, look, I'm not just assuming that they're fake. I've tested them out, and these are the reasons I believe that they're fake.
So you ordered a fake hit on your long-deceased husband. What happened once you put out the order?
Nothing really. Basically, they sort of just we came to a standstill when they wanted money, and I didn't want to give them any.
Did you give them a photo of your
Yes.
your deceased husband?
Yes, I did.
And a place where they could find him?
I gave them some address in Sydney that was of a vacant block.
And then what happened?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. They just wanted money. That's where everything came to a screeching halt. But I would ask questions like, so, are you in Sydney? How are you going to get to Sydney? All those sorts of things. And they just had no answer. They really hadn't thought it through very well.
Did you call them out? Did you say, I've scammed you as a scammer? Did you ever at any point say that this was actually proof that you're actually a scam artist? Did you ever say that to them?
No, I don't think so. I think I just sort of let it peter out.
There was another website you became involved in called Visa Mafia. What happened when you got entangled with them?
Well, Visa Mafia was not one of these fake-looking websites. It was actually a very slick, well-run website. What they did was they said that they had hitters all over the world and they hired gang members and that sort of thing. So wherever you were in the world, they'd put you in touch with a hitman in that area. And they were much more convincing. They advertised on Reddit. They had
on Reddit, on the surface internet.
Yeah, so they said they had people say that they had successful hits and get on this dark website, and they really had a marketing plan, a full marketing plan, and they were definitely a big step ahead of all the other hitman sites. But I still did not believe them, and I was on Reddit saying to everybody, all these sites are scams, this is not real, you'd have to be an idiot to believe it, all those sorts of things. And then the owner of this site started getting in contact with me. He started messaging me saying, take down your comments, take down your blog posts, I know who you are, you don't know who I am, I'll send people around, that sort of thing. The thing is, by that time, a friendly hacker had provided me with information that gave me the back door to this particular website. You
hacked your way with your friend into this website, this kind of like hire a tradie for hitmen site?
Yeah, well, not me personally. I'm no hacker, but certainly I was given access to all the files and the back door of this website by a friendly hacker. And what I got was a massive spreadsheet of all the people that did believe that this website was going to carry out murders for them. There was a spreadsheet of photographs, details, addresses, times when people are going to be home, ways that they wanted them killed. And as well as that, there was a lot of Bitcoin payments. So you could actually see that these people had paid real Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is not anonymous. You can go on the blockchain, everybody can see absolutely every transaction that's ever been made. You don't know who's made the transaction, but you can see the transaction. So when the hit site gave these people a Bitcoin address to make the payment into, you could go on the blockchain and see that that payment was indeed made. So these payments were made. These were people that were very much determined to kill the people, the targets that we had all these photographs of.
But this is a fake hitman site.
It's a fake hitman site.
And how were they stringing these clients along?
Well, that was the other thing. We had access to all the messages back and forth between the hitman site and the people that had taken out the orders, made the orders for the hits. And once they had the money, the hitman site would say, okay, we're going to hit them next Thursday, we're going to go to this place and I've arranged for a local gang member to go and do this hit. Then Thursday would come along and then the person would write to them and say, the target's still alive, what happened? Oh, well, he had car trouble and these gang members, they're never any good. You really should upgrade to a better hitman and get more money out of them. And he'd keep stringing them along and not killing anybody until they finally twigged that the whole thing was a scam and they'd lost all their money. And the amounts of money that people lost was anywhere between $2,000 and $50,000, with an average around $10,000 that people were paying to have hits taken out.
It's like when people buy a fake painting. They're the last people who want to believe that they've been scammed, and they will absolutely so they just kept on tipping more money into this scamming website. But nonetheless, you and your colleague suddenly had a whole stack of seriously incriminating evidence from the people who wanted their services, who were asking someone to go and kill someone that they knew. And you said you had addresses, you had photos, you had all this stuff, you had potential evidence of economic transactions there. What did you and your colleague do with this data you had on the clients for this fake hitman service?
Well, as a journalist, I wanted to just immediately write about it, but I didn't. we started contacting the authorities in all the countries where the hits had been taken out. The majority of them were in the US, but there were also Australian ones, there were UK and European ones all over the world. So we started contacting the authorities. And
what did they tell you?
They were like, they didn't know what to do with this information. It was like, well, dark web, hitmen, but they're fake. What are you talking about? The AFP, I've still got the email somewhere that said, look, your queries are best placed with ScamWatch rather than them. So it was very much something so new to them. This was 2016, so even though by then Silk Road had come and gone and people knew about the dark web, it still wasn't well known. It wasn't as well known as it is now. So they really didn't know what to do with this information. Chris was the one that was trying to get in touch with the FBI and the NCA. They very much stonewalled him. I've got all his emails of him trying to get them to listen to him. We just couldn't get anyone to listen.
So you have all this evidence, and one of the people on that target list was a woman called Eileen Ormsby. Tell me about her.
So Amy was a housewife in Minnesota, a place called Cottage Grove, and she was a dog trainer, deeply religious lady, and someone had put out a hit on her saying that, I want this bitch dead. She has slept with my husband and trying to steal my business. I want you to kill her. And this person, who called themselves Dog Day God, paid, I think, around $13,000 worth of Bitcoin to have a hit taken out on Amy.
Dog Day God.
Dog Day God is what they called themselves. There were dozens and dozens of messages back and forth between Bisa Mafia and Dog Day God. This was one of the people that kept on pouring more and more money in. I think there was at least 6 times where Bisa Mafia said, oh, the hit's going to happen today, and then it didn't in various places. And this was still ongoing when we finally broke the story and actually put it out into the world, into the news. And that's when Dog Day God said, oh, it looks like you're a fake. I want my money back. And obviously Bisa Mafia said, no, we're not going to give you your money back. So at that point, Amy was still alive. We had advised the FBI that she'd had a hit taken out on her. We didn't know at that point what the FBI did with that information, if anything.
So what happened to her?
The next thing I knew was I got a message from Chris saying, F word, F word, F word, she's dead. She's been killed. He'd seen a newspaper article about the murder of Amy Ormsby.
Who killed her?
Her husband. It was her husband all along. Her husband was Dog Day God. He was a minister in a church. It was a very fundamentalist church that did not believe in divorce, and he wanted a divorce. He wanted out of his marriage, and so as he couldn't divorce Amy, he decided the better way would be to get her killed. According to the evidence in court, he actually was the one that pulled the trigger and then tried to make it look like a suicide.
Was this a preventable death? I mean, given that you'd gone to the police and the FBI with this evidence that there was someone trying to kill this woman, was this preventable?
Well, you'd think so. There seemed to be some very great missteps. So the FBI did, in fact, contact Amy. They contacted the Cottage Grove local police, who went around to Amy's house, and they said to Amy, we need to talk to you, and they decided that it would be a good idea to talk to Amy and her husband at the same time. And they told her about this thing that had been taken out on her. Did she know anyone that it might have been? The husband tried to implicate a friend of Amy's that was in the same business, dog training business. And, yeah, they pretty much sort of left it, well, we don't know who it was, can't find out. If you think of anything else, let us know.
And they told her this while the husband was in the room?
Correct, yes.
So the husband was alerted?
The husband was alerted that they were onto it, which makes it really surprising that in a lot of ways that he carried through with it. But, you know, he went to elaborate lengths. He sent her a whole lot of emails telling her to kill herself, making her paranoid, making her afraid. So she was, for 6 months, she was absolutely terrified, had no idea who would want to kill her. I mean, she was literally this nice, not quite middle-aged lady, God-fearing lady who gave to her community and trained dogs. You couldn't find a less likely target for murder.
This is like the movie Fargo in so many ways, and it's in Minnesota too for all of that. You went to the trial of this wretched man, this pastor in Minnesota. What did you discover from attending that trial?
I did go to the trial. I had absolutely no doubt once they put the forensic evidence, I had no doubt whatsoever that he was in fact Dog Day God, and he got convicted for murder pretty quickly. I think the jury was only out 6 hours or something at most.
There are some even darker places of the dark web. What are some of the darkest corners to your mind, Eileen?
Okay, well, I mean, the way the dark web is it means that people who once upon a time would not have been able to find other people like them because the things that they wanted to do were so perverse that you couldn't really go around and sort of talk to people and say, are you into the same things that I'm into? The dark web provides a meeting place for those people. You know, the people we're talking about are people that want to do harm to children, like bad harm to children. And they now have a place where they can, in scare quotes, safely meet each other, talk to each other, share materials amongst each other, share advice amongst each other. And that is a very large part of the dark web, is the production and transmission of child abuse material.
Oh, God. This is the thing that's been built by the US military. Could the US military simply pull the plug on it, or would that undo the whole of the deep web and would we lose all our banking records and everything else that exists on the deep web?
No, it won't do that, but it's not something that the plug can be pulled on. It's an open source thing. It's almost like the internet now. It's out there. It's there, and it can't be just sort of shut down by pulling a plug on it. No.
So it lives in a million different places. In other words, what are some of the biggest myths you've discovered about the dark web?
The number one myth, which does get put out there by the tabloids whenever they can, is something called red rooms. Red rooms, the idea of red rooms is someone gets kidnapped, they get put into a room, and then you can purchase the opportunity to watch her being killed.
But that's a myth?
That's a myth. It's an absolute myth. There's been nothing even approaching any sort of evidence that something like that exists.
What do you think that says about us as human beings, that people want to believe that such places exist? Is it like snuff movies that I don't think anyone ever found any evidence for that either, did they?
It's exactly like snuff movies. And, snuff movies first sort of became a thing in the 70s, I think, and people to this day absolutely believe there's these shadowy underground millionaires that pay money to have snuff movies made, even though there's never been any evidence whatsoever that a snuff movie has been made in that way. Things nowadays, things are getting a little bit blurrier just because everybody has a camera in their pocket at all times. But back when snuff movies were a big urban legend, so many people believed that because it could happen, it does happen. And even though, in the absence of any sorts of evidence whatsoever, people really want to believe that that's a thing that happens. And, now that's moved on to the whole QAnon thing and adrenochrome, and people just, for some reason, they want to have this special knowledge that nobody else knows about that they know. I don't know. It's beyond me why people want to believe this stuff.
Nonetheless, there is kind of the wickedest form of human activity going on in this place, and it just takes other forms, like you were saying. It still makes me want to see the US military go out and dump a truckload of fertiliser on any server that's hosting the dark web. Are there any good or moral uses for the dark web at all that you can see?
Oh, yeah, for sure. There's companies like The Guardian, the International Investigative Journalists Association, even the CIA, all have onion sites, so dark web sites. And the reason they have this is so that people that live in regimes that censor their internet can still go and have a look and look at those sorts of things through Tor and not get caught.
So we're talking about Chinese, Russian, Iranian dissidents, those kind of people?
Yeah. So it gives them a way of getting around their censorship walls. So that's one thing. And it also gives them an opportunity to be able to whistleblow without any chance of it coming back on them. There'll be no artefacts left. There'll be no digital trace back to the people that upload documents or blow the whistle. So there are uses like that. And that's why there are legitimate sites that have a presence on the dark web as well.
You were saying the Silk Road was shut down and its successor as well. Nonetheless, there are other successor sites that are bigger than ever. Is the dark web having a heyday or is it on its way out?
I think in a lot of ways it's had its heyday. I mean, the current market leader of the Silk Road type is bigger than Silk Road ever was. It's been running for a couple of years. But the dark web in general, I think, has had its heyday. It's crawling now with three-letter agencies that are putting out what they call FUD, so fear, uncertainty, doubt, sowing all these seeds. Is this really a vendor or am I talking to a Fed? All those sorts of things. And
this is a standard tactic the FBI used to dismantle the Ku Klux Klan back in the 1960s. They had so many agents infiltrate the Klan that no one could trust each other anymore, and therefore without trust you can't operate any organisation.
That's exactly what they do. Like, people like to think that there's all these incredible cybercrime units and all that sort of thing working on the dark web, but it's not. It's good old-fashioned police work. Follow the money. So Bitcoin is not used as much now because the crooks did realise that it is the most traceable currency in the whole world. Far from being anonymous, it's actually super, super traceable. You can just follow it through the blockchain. And there's companies now that even if you try to obfuscate it in different ways, there's companies out now that can follow that very, very closely. So they've had to replace Bitcoin with another sort of cryptocurrency. But yeah, so following the money is a big one, and infiltrating and social engineering, so getting people to reveal things about themselves, which is very much a way that they get into the child abuse sites. I don't envy the people whose job it is to go in there and pretend to be one of them, but I do admire them.
Just finally, Eileen, you were talking before about the dramatic arrest of the founder of the Silk Road on the dark web, Ross Ulbricht, aka the Dread Pirate Roberts, who was arrested in the San Francisco library. What became of the Dread Pirate Roberts?
Yeah, so he was arrested in October 2013, and at his trial, a lot of things came out that made us realise that the Silk Road wasn't this incredible, beautiful, peace-loving, peace and mung beans type place that we thought it was.
Really? Wow.
Because behind the scenes, he was getting threatened. There were people that wanted a piece of this. There was organised crime getting involved. And he wound up ordering a bunch of hits on people that never got taken out, but he thought that they did. He paid a lot of money for them. So this was hits on vendors that had gone rogue and that were threatening to release information about Silk Road's customers.
Eileen, I have to ask, did he go to one of those hire a hitman sites on the dark web to do this?
He did not. He turned to one of his biggest vendors that had told him that they were they hinted that they were part of the Hells Angels, but that all turned out to be a massive scam as well. And he also tried to hire two undercover agents to take out another hit, so that didn't go very well.
So this is the guy who set up the world's biggest drugs marketplace and then also was ordering the assassination of people that were trying to horn in on his business. I imagine the courts took a dim view of this?
They did, and partly because of those chat logs about those assassinations, he received one of the harshest sentences I've ever heard of in my life. He received 2 life sentences plus 40 years without any possibility of parole whatsoever. I think he was 29 when he got sentenced. Obviously, he had a lot of supporters still outside because, none of these hits ever actually eventuated, so there were no dead people from hits. A lot of people still believed that in what he believed in and what he was doing. There was a huge Free Ross movement led by his mother that went on for well over a decade.
And where is he today? Is he in jail now?
He's not. A couple of weeks ago, Donald Trump gave him a full unconditional pardon and he was released immediately. I think it was 2 days shy of 14 years since he wrote that first message as Altoid on the Bitcoin forum.
This is an amazing story, Eileen. It's been really extraordinary having this conversation with you. I'd like to have you back on again before too long to tell us more. There's so much more to this story. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much, Eileen.
Thanks so much, Richard.
Eileen Ormsby is a journalist who specialises in researching the dark web. She's published several books, including The Darkest Web, The Silk Road, Murder on the Dark Web. Today's conversation was created on the lands of the Jagera, Turrbal and Gadigal peoples. Producer is Maggie Morris, executive producer is Carmel Rooney. I'm Richard Feidler. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to a podcast of Conversations with Richard Feidler. For more Conversations interviews, please go to the website abc.net.au/conversations.